Welcome to our online reading session from Pennings magazine. We're delighted to have our readers and writers and our Writers in Exile committee here tonight. And we're going to have some readings from Pennings December edition. As you all probably know already, Scottish Pen was begun as an international writers' movement in 1921, and then in 1927, Scottish Pen was formed. So it's been running a long time, more than 100 years now. So we're going to have readings from Donald Adamson, A.C. Clarke, Lizzie Eldridge, Elizabeth Bertelsen, and Mandy Hagith. And we have with us here the members of the Writers in Exile committee. So that's Moira McPartlin.
Hi.
Thank you. And we have Samina Chaudhry. Samina.
Oh, hi.
And we have Gianni. We have Gianni Mastrangioli. Gianni.
Correct. Good evening, everyone.
It's always a difficult one, your surname, Gianni. And we have Gemma Neville.
Hello.
Yeah, and these are the hardworking folk on the Writers in Exile committee. So we're going to hear now from Moira McPartlin, who's going to talk a little bit about the Pennings online magazine. Tell us a little bit about that. Thank you, Moira.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming in along tonight. Yes, the readings are coming from the Penning magazine, the last Penning magazine that we had in December, the Joy issue. The magazine was established, Penning is the Scottish Pen's online magazine, and the magazine was established in 2009 to publish poetry and prose from Pen members and also from people living in Scotland whose first language is not English, Scots or Gaelic. We have 2 themed issues a year, and these issues are edited by the committee of for Writers in Exile, and I've been honoured to be on that committee since 2013. For each issue, we invite a guest editor, and the guest editor comes along to the editorial meeting, and we decide from the submissions that we've received into the Pen office which ones go through to the magazine. And it's anonymous, so we have no idea who the submissions are from. We also feature a guest writer of international stature, and they are quite often from troubled situations. So it's a good opportunity for writers to have a platform to show their work alongside these international writers. In 2017, to celebrate the Scottish Pen's 90th anniversary, we produced an anthology. It's called I'm Coming With You. Don't know if you can see that. And we pulled all from the rich vein of all of the publications that we had. We pulled the best pieces out of that to produce this anthology. We had our first reading discussion live event during Refugee Week in 2019, and it was a great success. We had that in Glasgow, and we had hoped to include that as an annual event, but unfortunately we haven't been able to do that. So it's absolutely fantastic that we have this event tonight to showcase the fabulous writing that we get submitted to us and published in the online magazine. So without further ado, before I go on to introduce you to our last guest editor, the theme of the next issue is renewal, and that deadline for that is the 31st of March, so a couple of weeks' time. The last magazine our guest editor was Valentina Bold, and the theme was joy. So I'm going to pass you on to Valentina now, and she's going to talk about what it was like to be that guest editor for Joy.
Excuse me, Valka, just before you start, can I mention something which I just thought about? This event is being recorded, and just in case anyone does not want to be seen on camera, they might want to go off video for a wee while. But just to let you know, it's all being recorded. So it's up to yourself. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Val.
Well, thanks very much, Liz, and thanks, Moira, as well. It really was quite a pleasure to have the chance to be a guest editor on this issue. And I'm even more pleased that I can be here tonight and hear some of the wonderful poetry that was featured in the issue themed around joy. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the readings, because I know the very high quality of the work that we selected, and hearing it in the poets' own voices is going to be a real treat. So I'm looking forward to that. I was asked to say a little bit about the editorial processes, and I think really all I can say is that they were both very thorough and very generous in spirit. The selection process went through several rounds before we came to a collective decision on the final contents. And it was quite difficult because all the work submitted was of an extremely high standard. And for me, there were only two disappointments, really. One of them was not being able to include all the work, and the other was that we did it virtually. So the discussions were not in person, they were by email and by Zoom meetings, without the pleasure of having these discussions one-to-one. So I think the next guest editor will have hopefully the chance to do this in person if things go the way they are. I wanted to say too that I did think, as I said in the magazine itself, that I really felt that the issue is a wonderful one. It explores joy really in all its dimensions. It's foregrounded by a recognition of the work and activism of Varavaro Rao, and I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing that name wrong, because I've only seen it written down, but he's a writer who very much celebrates joy in the sense of the universal bonds that bind everyone, and it's wonderful to read that too. The poetry itself, I felt, was unified by a sense of real compassion, or a sense of humanity, and a great deal of exuberance as well, which made it a real pleasure to read. It's poetry, I think, if you were to sum it up, you would say it's topical, it's powerful, much of it is delightful, it's natural, and it's very inspiring. And I liked the way that it explored the commonplace, often in quite extraordinary ways. So it's a very beautiful, very moving set of poetry to look at as a whole. The issue, as Moira said, came out at the end of 2020, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that was the 250th anniversary year of the birth of one of my favourite poets of all time, James Hogg, the Ettrick Shepherd. And for that reason, it seemed a very appropriate issue to be themed around joy, because one of Hogg's best known songs is A Wish for Joy, and at the end of a departing year, as 2020 was when it came out, and let's hope it's completely departed. I don't think anyone would like to experience that particular year again. But Liz asked me if I would quote the verse that I did in my guest editor's introduction tonight as well. So I'll just end with a verse from Hogg's Good Night and Joy Be With You All. The year is wearing to the wane and day is fading west awa. Loud raves the torrent and the rain, and dark the cloud comes down the shaw. But let the tempest toot and blaw upon his loudest winter horn. Good night and joy be with you all. We'll maybe meet again in the morn. Thanks. And I think I'll pass back to Liz at this point.
Thanks very much, Val. That was great. Had a lovely description of your experience and extra added on there. That's just lovely. Thank you. As Moira was saying, we always have an international writer featured in each edition, and in the December edition, it was a writer called Varavara Rio, and okay. Sorry, disappearing. At the time of publication, can you hear okay? Start my video. It's gone. Sorry, outbacks of Dumfries occasionally we get cut off. But the writer was Varavara Rio, and in the year of the celebrations for the Declaration of Arbroath, Penn brought out a lovely book, and in it there was an extract from a poem by Varavara Rio, and so we included that in the Pennings edition. At the age of 80, by December, he was taken from prison and taken to hospital with COVID, and at the moment I don't know his situation, whether he survived that or not, but the beautiful extract, which was Chitra Ramaswamy had put this into the Penn Declaration book, and it's just a lovely piece of writing, and it goes like this. A man's death perturbs me. I may not have any acquaintance, I might not have heard the name, but when you know that he is a man, how can it be that he is not related to you or me? So that was the international writer we featured in December. We're going to hear now from our writers, and they're going to introduce themselves at the beginning, and the running order which they have is A.C. Clarke, Lizzie Eldridge, Donald Adamson, Lizzie Bertelsen, and Mandy Hagith. So that's off to you, first of all, to A.C. Clarke. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Can everybody hear me all right? Can you hear me? You can. Yes. Good. Right. Thank you very much for including my poem in the Joy issue, which is a delight to read, I agree. That is the issue itself. I'm not talking about my poem specifically. And thank you, all the people who have come to hear us read. Liz asked us, or Lisa asked us, to say a little bit about joy before reading the poem, or poems. And I thought I'd start with Blake's, "He who kisses a joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise." And there the idea is that joy is kind of evanescent, transient. It's not something you can force. You can't sort of sit down and say, I'm going to have a joyful moment. It's more like Wordsworth said, you're surprised by joy. It sneaks up on you. It kind of ambushes you, if you like, sometimes when you're least expecting it. And especially I found myself during lockdown, when there wasn't very much to be joyful about, to be honest, that suddenly something might just be a bird singing, it might just be a shaft of sunlight, it might be something like that, would make my heart lift. And I wasn't making it do that, it just did. And I think really then joy is a kind of response to the variousness of the world, or maybe it's more that the variousness of the world is ambushing you and forcing you to look at it. So 2 poems. The first one isn't in the magazine. They're both praise poems. This one, it's called In Praise of Winter. I actually like winter. I prefer it to summer. And I started off with an unlikely line from Simon Armitage, "Miss April delivers the kiss of life to a silk cut by the fire." Now that seems to have nothing whatever to do with what I'm writing about, but I've incorporated words from that into the poem. It was kind of forming the structure of the poem. In Praise of Winter. When December days roll themselves up like hedgehogs, I never miss the lengthening light, the buds in waiting of fated April. For me, the season of candles and Santas delivers. It's not the gift-wrapped disappointments, still less the looped insistence in stores of ersatz bonhomie, the drunken kiss under the mistletoe that takes me clean out of the wait and hurry, this improbable life confected from plastic and dreams. What takes me to the deep well at the core of my being is small, a particular shade in a rained out sky, the crushed silk sheen of a wet crimson leaf, bales of cut hay stoic under barn roofs, apples unplucked by gales on a wintry branch, the sweet, sad scent of wood fire. And this, another praise poem, is the one that was chosen for the magazine, in praise of small pleasures. Glory to whatever is at work to make things happen. Creator, demiurge, energy of atoms, for the small mercies that get us through the day. Sun on a honeystone wall, say, or a washing line brisking in a spring breeze. The caffeine jolt of the morning's first cup, the tenacity of the lopped elder, bare limbs already beginning to clothe themselves. The audacity of weeds, the slyness of mushrooms, the vespers of coal tits. The comfort of curtains drawn against darkness, the indulgence of mirrors, the kindness of lamps, the touch of new laid sheets, waiting for bodies to warm them. For the whole, loud, soft, bright, dim, rough, smooth, sharp, sweet, stinking, scented gallimaufry that clatters and twinkles and tumbles and dances around us, to take our minds off ourselves and our pettiness. Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's me next. Okay, thanks, AC Clarke. I really enjoyed listening to that. And what you were saying about joy just kind of springing up on us really resonated. That's how it felt for me in the writing of the piece that I'm going to read tonight, which was published in Penning magazine, Joy. Joy doesn't come very naturally to me, so but it happens because you can't stop it. You know, even in moments of deep sadness, deep grief, deep pain and sorrow, there are still things that somehow just happen and speak to you, and just touch you. Just for people that don't know me, so my name is Lizzie Eldridge. I'm a writer, and I lived in Malta for 12 years and came back to Glasgow, my home city, at the end of 2019, December. So I was just feeling my way into being back, really, when lockdown happened. So it's been a crazy experience where people I haven't seen for years to begin with, that live in Glasgow, I haven't seen. It's been a really, really weird, as it has for everybody, just weird experience. Nevertheless, there are moments of joy and moments of total pleasure and moments of just laughing and being happy. And I'd like to read the story that I referred to earlier, called In the Dead of Night. And amongst all the kind of like darker moments are moments of lightness and happiness and humor. Okay, here we go. We're the lucky ones, we said, sneaking a look at each other as we passed by. The older folk had no right to cross our path. They should stay safely shut behind closed doors. People who'd never run since they were at school heaved their bodies forwards in the quiet darkness. Dogs were bought en masse and new leads sold out on online stores. The park became as popular as Blackpool on a busman's holiday. The supermarket was suddenly alluring. Huh, at least the troops aren't on the streets, one gaunt man laughed. The trees were our companions, their shapes twisting and curling against the tenement windows. Architecture acquired a new dimension in the ghost-like evening stillness. A single car seemed an inexplicable intrusion, its intentions worthy of interrogation. Nobody drives a car these days. Sometimes the loneliness hit you with such an all-consuming ache. And why did they have to keep chucking these bloody numbers and letters and diagnostic predictions at us the whole bloody time? Or was this to give us something to focus on in case we lost track of which particular day of the same old bloody week it was? It was always a week that was. Sandra, who lost her husband a year ago, regretted she hadn't got a cat. A cat would have helped, she mused. Alex, who'd planned to spend the weekend with his parents, wished he'd stayed at uni. At least he could have amused himself with drugs, and distance would mean think of his dad in a fonder light. Now he was smothered with the realization that his father was even more of a primal wanker than he'd remembered, and he had to confront this incarnation of idiocy on a 24-hour basis. Aye, of course, Black Lives Matter, his father said, as the glare of the TV lit up his hardened face. But that doesn't mean you have to go tearing down statues for pity's sake. And look at them all. No masks, no social distancing. What's the world coming to? Lorraine wished she was a million miles away. She'd imagined getting a place of her own, vanishing when he was out at work. He'd go mental trying to find her, shouting at her friends that he'd kill them if they didn't tell him where she was. And so she stayed. Right now, there was no exit point, and her body ached through every angry day. Daniel was happy, more or less. He wasn't quite sure who the woman was who came by in the morning and knew his name, and was really very friendly, given he couldn't place exactly where he knew her from. Sometimes he thought she was the same woman, or a woman he'd met 100 years ago. Or maybe it was a different person each time, because he couldn't be certain that he'd spoken to this woman before, or that she always had the same colour eyes. But why go to all that bother to befriend a stranger and make out you care about their well-being? Because it wasn't as if he had any money to offer her, or if he did, he had no idea where he'd stashed it, unless it was under the bed, which would explain why she, or assuming they weren't all the same, all these various different people, kept fussing around while he was trying to rest, tucking in the sheets, or whipping them away completely with the ruse they needed to wash, when how many times do you really need to wash sheets in the average week? He was sure his wife, because everybody has a wife, don't they, had never been so diligent in her day, whenever exactly that was. Had she hidden his money beneath the bed? Maria's tooth fell out on the same day our mum said they might have to stay at home for a very long time. When she woke up, there was a big shiny pound coin right there in her bed. Maria decided it was definitely worth not going out and contemplated living inside for the rest of her life. But on the 13th day, she felt angry and jealous. The girl next door had a garden. The tooth fairies obviously loved her. They gave her a trampoline. Maria rubbed her coin and made a wish as she watched the girl jumping up and down. On day 17, the girl saw Maria at the window and waved her arms around wildly, inviting her to join. Sandra smiled as she watched two small, skinny girls go flying through the air. Alex told his dad exactly what he thought of him. Lorraine was relieved that one of her kids seemed safe. Daniel had a dream that night. The world was white and bodies were rising and falling, light and free. No one disturbed his dreams, and he kept his eyes closed, hushed and soothed by this rocking to and fro. Far away, on the corner of an empty street, someone, somewhere, began to sing. Thank you. And I'll now pass on to Donald.
Unmute, must remember. Thank you very much, Lizzie. And greetings everyone from Finland. And just like to say how delighted I was to be in this issue. And I think it's a real cracker of an issue. It's one of the best, in my opinion. I really loved the work in this issue. I'm just going to read a couple of poems. The first one is called Graced, and it's actually based on my mother. And the idea is that even at the end of a life, amid, let's say, dementia, there can be moments of joy, moments of illumination, which she had. So graced. No doubt of it, hers was a life lived fully, even as her days narrowed into a corridor of remembering less and less, diminishing and yet much the same in essence, happiness swooping down like birds in sudden flight, as when she heard a tune and placed the pitch with so far repetition, every note, or just before she left us, wide awake and open-eyed, enunciating clearly, love is the most important thing, wouldn't you say? Moments in full song, an unquenched sense of wholeness felt in small epiphanies, lived in, like the times she'd known herself fulfilled as friend, teacher, wife, and mother, graced in ways that we, if luck is ours, can be, finding joys like Christmas lights strung above our stepping, lamps undimmed, illuminating us and our way home. The second poem is in Scots. It's called The Sacrament of Earth, meaning the sacrament of earth. And my idea here was that we can celebrate the beauty of the earth even while we regret the horrible things that are being done to it. So the poem I saw as a kind of like a religious service or a religious observance, kind of moving to and fro between the utterance and the response. So, the sacrament of earth. For the face ye turn in the summer dawn, when waves are glancing, daffin, dancing, wi' wee scamps of cloud, and the trees on the inch kythe green buchs, I thank ye. For the scarts and skaiths, witterings and words, on sycamore, nor seen nor shone, daunted and aderned by loveliness, your heart-breaking beauty, I thank you. And for this peace, this oor o' grace, this stone atween which racket and gain and racket to come, for this moment unsocht o' sacrament, I thank you. And now I'm going to pass on to Lizzie Eldridge. Sorry, Lizzie Bertelsen. I've got my list is vanishing from my phone here. So am I right, Lizzie Bertelsen?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, I'll mute myself. On you go, Lizzie.
That's great. Thank you, Donald. Yeah, so I'm continuing in the Nordic genre, actually, as I'm from Denmark, and I've been living in Scotland for the last 4 years. And I think, just like Lizzie was talking a bit about earlier, I've also struggled sometimes with writing about joy. But I think, like most others in the last year or so, I've been very challenged with, my whole perception with joy. Can our perception of the way we go to joy endure hardships and the trials like we've gone through? That's something that I was kind of starting to wonder, when we can't turn to the places or the things or people that we usually could, what do we do? How are we able to find happiness and so on? And these are some of the reflections that I kind of wanted to push through in my piece. Okay, so if my body is the vessel in which I guard and keep my soul, my feelings, my thoughts, my very being, the sphere is the environment in which I want it to thrive, breathe, wander, and grow. I give it water and food in order for it to live. I give it laughter and tears in order for it to grow, lessons to learn and thoughts to reflect in the air of flexibility. As a child, I was wrapped in fairy tales of happy endings, and love is a feeling that would keep me warm, my heart beating and the world tender. As a teenager, I would breathe a fire that I was first taught to put out. But with wisdom and faults, I learned it was the thing I needed in order to grow and leave condemning actions in the past. By walking through the forest and climbing up against the deep-rooted trees, I could feel the aroma of laxity, and the leaves would give me fresh air to breathe. Fleeting moments of despair and agony could overturn a blanket of delight. But somewhere deep inside this vessel, I knew thoughts of leaving a world in pain would always be your own choice. It is not a matter of the tears left in your eyes or spoken words leaving silent traces of scars on your skin, but rather the fact that you can put decay aside and wait for withered flowers to regrow into a rainbow of colors in the field. The sun and moon can stomach your sensitive silence, and you do not need to be afraid of wandering alone, my love. You have the floating stars to keep you company. Thank you. And then I think I'll send it on to Mandy.
Thanks, Lizzie. Thank you all very much. It's such a privilege to be able to be here and read, and such a joy to read about joy. As AC Clarke said at the beginning, we were asked to say something about joy, and the first thing I think of when I think of joy is birdsong, and the fact that I sit and listen. As I came here, I was listening to a robin up in a treetop, and they just sound like they're singing with joy, and I don't know whether that's me imposing my joy on them or whether it really is the birds' genuine feeling at this time of year as we come out of winter, but I like to think so. It was intriguing to hear Lizzie talk about choice. I think that although I agree that joy ambushes us, we have a positive choice to make the space in which to be ambushed, I think. And I've for many years been inspired by a word I discovered in Bali in Indonesia, which is a word rahayu, which is a thing we don't have a word for in English, and we need it, I think, because it's the act of being grateful for the present moment. And I think if we stop and feel gratitude for now, then maybe that leaves a little space for joy to ambush us. So I'm going to read two poems, the first of which was in the Joy edition, and they're both short. And this is a poem called Song of the Earth. Beneath high pebbly melodies of warbling stream stones, a bass voice sings a deep-peaked lullaby, a long song, slow as the mountains, sweeter and deeper than sleep. And the second poem is called Lockdown, and I wrote it shortly after we got locked down last year, and in the first throes, and it seems all that year has come full circle, and here we are again. Lockdown. The pond teems with life that has presumably no desire to be anywhere other than here. Trees love it so much they've fixed themselves deep into the very soil of the place. Ravens on the crag, wrens in rock nooks, even the warblers self-isolate, uncomplaining. So I learn from them, put down desire for anything other than what I can find here, on the croft, in the woods, by the shore, in my garden, on my shelves, outside my mind. And I bring it indoors, place it on the page. Grass leaves, fern fronds, caterpillars and weevils, cheeps and trilling, tree buds, all working on their poems, one green word at a time. Thank you. And I think I hand back to Liz at this point.
Thank you, Mandy. That was just lovely. These were just terrific readings, folks. It's been so nice to actually hear everyone reading their pieces. Normally we just go online and we have the magazine, and we had talked at some point of trying to have live readings in Scotland, maybe in different locations, twice a year from the magazine, and maybe after everything's changed again and we're out of lockdown, we can actually do that, because it is so different to hear you all reading your work, rather than just seeing it on the page. It just brings it all to life, and it's so much more personal. So thank you all very much. And as one of you said, it's trying to find moments of joy, which even out of lockdown, I suppose we all do want to have moments of joy all our lives, at moments even out of lockdown. And so this has been a really moment of joy for us to hear these tonight. And it is a difficult thing to write about, as someone else said. It's quite hard. It's easier to write about dreadful things, probably. So well done, and I'll come up with so many different variations on what is joyful. Our next magazine, as was mentioned, Moira said, it's going to be the deadline 31st of March. And before I say about that, actually, just to say, all of the biographies of the writers who've read tonight and who are in the magazine, all the biographies, and you can read a bit more about each of the writers online on the Scottish Pen website. If you go to Pennings, and there's a little biography about all the writers, because it's quite interesting to see what you're all up to, what else you've written and where you've appeared, etc. So the biographies are really important as well. So yes, the next edition is the title's Endeavour, so that's quite an interesting choice. We usually ask the guest editor to pick the next theme, and that was Val. You're responsible, Val. You picked Endeavour. So that's a really interesting theme to be looking ahead to, and it'll be fascinating to see the variations that come up from that. Again, we're going to have a guest editor and an international featured writer, and for our guest editor, Moira suggested Leila Soma. And Moira, can you say a little bit about your choice and what Leila said about agreeing?
sorry to sort of correct you on this one, Liz, but I think we had endeavour and renewal, and we decided on renewal for the theme for the next. So can you unmute, please? Don't know what you're saying. So the next theme is renewal, and the deadline for that is the 31st of March. And the guest editor, as Liz said, is Leela Soma. And Leela is originally from Chennai, India, and she came to Glasgow in 1969 with her husband. She has a number of novels under her belt and lots of publications of short pieces, poems, prose in literary magazines and anthologies. And her latest novel is called Murder, I've got it written down, Murder at the Mela, and it's a crime novel based in Glasgow. I've known Leela for a number of years through various organisations in the west of Scotland, the Federation of Writers, the Scottish Writers' Centre, Ouija Wednesday, and she's also been involved in the Mulgai Book Festival, and she's been recently appointed the 2021 Screever for the Federation of Writers. So she's well qualified to come along and be the guest editor with us. So we're all looking forward to working with Leela in the next magazine. And I think now, Liz, what were you going to say?
I was going to say thank you very much, and I will endeavour to get the title correct.
I'm so sorry.
We did have two, and for some reason I was thinking it was going to be endeavour. We could keep that for another time if we're stuck for it. Okay, thanks a lot, Moira. That's a really good introduction to Leela and our next guest writer. Our featured international writer is chosen by Samina, who's going to say a bit about Rizwan Akhtar.
Hi there, everyone. Just going to say that all the readings were really powerful and fantastic. And like everyone else, I just thought the issue was really, really brilliant. So I'm just going to say a couple of words about Rizwan Akhtar. He's a poet from Pakistan. He's an assistant professor in the Department of English at Punjab University, Lahore, Pakistan. He completed his PhD in post-colonial and theory by women writers, and he did that from the Essex University. His debut book, which is a collection of poems, Lahore Uncoming, has been published by Punjab University Press. And his poetry mostly deals with themes of homeland, cross-cultural conflicts, space, exile, human suffering, and nature. And also some of his poems focus on the human condition. Yeah, so he's going to be our next guest editor. Thank you. Just pass it on to Liz now.
Thanks very much, Samina. That's great. So really look forward to learning a bit more about Rizwan Akhtar. It's interesting when we pick international writers because very often we don't know much about them, and it's terrific to have them brought into more into the public eye in Scotland, names that we might not have met before, and be directed to reading more of their work and discovering the experiences that they've come through, which is what pen's about really, is trying to give a voice to people who have been silenced so much. So thank you very much for that. We've got a few minutes. I just wondered if there might be, if there's lots of interesting people in our audience, a lovely big audience, and if there are any questions directed to the writers or generally to Pen, I think the technique is to put something on chat at the bottom or Q&A, but if anyone has got anything they would like to raise, we've probably got 5 minutes, we can do that actually. Or are you? Nope, everyone's happy. Perhaps it would be quite interesting to ask one or two of the writers. One of you mentioned it's difficult to write. I think it was A.C. Clarke said it's difficult to write about joy. And I was going to ask, like, Mandy, you had work about the natural world, as you often do, write about the natural world. And would you say that you've got a kind of a ready source sitting there that you can dip into, because there's something there always to bring joy? Did it make it easier to write about joy for you?
I think I write about yeah, I write from a place of contentment a lot of the time. I think I find it much more difficult to write. You said it's easier to write about things that you're discontented about, but actually I think I channel that energy somewhere else, and it doesn't tend to turn into poetry for me. So it's poems that ambush me. I think I can't quite get them to come of their own accord. They kind of seem to swoop in an yes, in a way that they're in charge of rather than me, it sometimes feels like. But for sure, a daily walk and a process of going out and marveling and wondering at the world is the source of a lot of my happiness in life, I guess, and that's where a lot of my poems come from. So yeah. You're muted, Liz.
So a lot of the instruction these days has been to get a daily walk, etc., etc. So basically what you're saying is what is often suggested just now for coming out of a depth of misery, to go out into the natural world. So that's basically what you're suggesting too.
Sure, to go into the natural world. I always think we are part of nature, so it's just the return home, really. So.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Donald, would it be possible to ask you the same thing in Finland then? What the joys of -5? How easy was it for you to write about joy?
I don't think I often write about joy. I think I find it easier to write in anger, perhaps sometimes, or I suppose I'm kind of increasingly interested in, maybe I wouldn't call it mystical experience, but kind of contemplative experience. So I don't know if joy comes naturally to me, but I do like writing about beauty, which I suppose is joy too. So I enjoyed writing about joy very much this time.
Does it raise the spirits to write about it?
It does indeed, yes. Yes, I was amazed that it was possible to do so. And especially when I was tackling things like the idea of dementia, to find something joyful in there. Moments of illumination that hopefully, I suppose there's a kind of hope here, hopefully they come for you and they come for me, no matter what condition we're in, that some kind of joy comes from it or in it. And I can't say any more than that. Yep.
Yeah, you've written it in your work, so. Yeah. Lizzie, could you say a bit more about your technique and inspiration then, not just for joy, but generally for your writing work? You're writing your own work normally.
Me, Lizzie, or?
Oh, there's two Lizzies, of course. Okay, Lizzie Eldridge, first of all, maybe.
So I think, like as Donald was saying, most of the kind of work that I that I've written and most of the work that I write tends to come from painful places. You know, when I'm joyfully happy, which is not, to be honest, that often, but when I am, I'm too busy being joyfully happy to write about it. And usually writing for me is a kind of process of trying to deal with things, not in a psychotherapeutic way, but trying to put a structure to things that don't make sense. Whereas happiness and joy for me kind of make sense. And, you know, I just don't really can write about them, or I don't very often. What I found joyful in terms of writing that particular story was that I began writing without a plan. And, you know, I'm not particularly loving lockdown. There are benefits, blah, 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 but I wouldn't say it's the best time of my life. And yet, in writing the story, these lovely moments came through. So by the end, it had to end on a happy note. It had to get there, because that's where it was going. There was nothing forced about it. And actually, I did look out my window one day when it was nearly a year ago, and it was really tight lockdown, and it really felt like you were kind of inside your house, and it was horrible. And I looked out and I did see a girl opposite just jumping up and down on this trampoline, and I just thought, wow, that is beautiful. Lockdown or not, she can still do that. And it was a really memorable, beautiful moment.
Literally jumping for joy.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. Can we go to our other Lizzie? Would you be happy to say a little bit too about your inspiration, Lizzie, and technique?
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely resonate with what Lizzie and Donna has been saying. Sometimes it just seems easier to get inspiration from writing out of pain. But I think I can resonate with Donna say, like, writing about beauty, I think can be definitely writing about joy as well. And I think especially under this pandemic, that's been a big inspiration of mine, like, you know, going for a walk, seeing the sun coming through some trees, seeing simple things like flowers, you know, coming through the soil. It's just been about appreciating the small moments, I think, which has been really interesting, because that's kind of been a new inspiration for me. So then maybe it's been easy also to find joyful things to write about, because at some point I just didn't want to keep writing about Corona, lockdown, loneliness, and all these things. So it's been really interesting as well to kind of be able to look at the world in a different way.
Thank you, Lizzie. That's great. And finally, AC Clarke, would you like to come in there?
Well, I don't know whether I could add much to what I said at the beginning, really. I'm like other people, that most of my poetry is not particularly joyful. Like Donald, actually, quite often anger sparks it off. Certainly the political poems it does. And it's also a question, as others have said, of trying, well, it was Lizzie, I think, Lizzie Eldridge said, to make sense of something, trying to work out why you're feeling a certain way or why other people might be feeling a certain way. And often it's those conflicted emotions which are the most interesting to write about, whether it's poetry or prose. And that's not to do with joy. But joy, as I said at the beginning, it just comes. And it comes every day. You know, very often it is just from walking out, like Mandy. I'm not actually in wild nature in Glasgow, and I do miss the hill walks that I was doing before lockdown. But, you know, you can just walk down the street and you can hear a bird, or you can see a flower, or just see a person. And you get joy from being alive, I think.
Well, that sounds a lovely note to end on, given that we're thinking of other writers who don't have such joy in their lives. So thank you very much. To finish then, folks, just to say an enormous thank you to all of the committee for working together across the year to bring the magazine together, to all the writers, to Donald, the two Lizzies, to AC Clarke and Mandy, and all the audience for coming along. And also, I'd really like to thank, and I'm sure the committee would, is Lisa Clarke in the Pen Office, because she's just been terrific and just keeps us all on the right path, technologically and in lots of other ways too. So thank you to you, Lisa, hiding behind the pen imprint there. Yes, we know you're in behind there listening, so thank you. We all say thank you very much. So take care everyone, and do please write towards the next copy. 31st of March, it's not very long to go, and the theme is renewal. So thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.